Hi everyone, welcome back. Today is a very special day. It's an auspicious day. Actually, every day is auspicious. Every day has its own uniqueness and its own special qualities to it. Whether days of the week, days of the month, or days of the year. But today is especially auspicious. It is the holiday of Tu B'Shvat, the 15th day of the month of Shvat, which in the Hebrew calendar is called Rosh Hashanah Lilanot, the Rosh Hashanah of trees. The Gemara, the Talmud, in the tractate of Rosh Hashanah on the second page, discusses about Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat is an odd holiday, though. It's not like Passover or Sukkot, where you can't drive, or you have holiday meals at home. We have special prayers in synagogue. It's not like that. It's not a biblical holiday at all. It's not even mentioned anywhere in the Torah. And it's not a rabbinical holiday like Hanukkah or Purim, where we say the Al HaNisim prayer, where we light candles or we read the Megillah or anything like that. There's no Megillah, no story of Tu B'Shvat. Interestingly, there's no most holidays, virtually every holiday, has a source in terms of a very important story that took place with the Jewish people. Hanukkah, of course, the story of the Maccabees fighting the Greeks, and Purim, we're fighting the Persians, and Pesach, we left Egypt, Sukkot, we dwelt in Sukkahs, etc. Tu B'Shvat, nothing particular happened on Tu B'Shvat that we are going to commemorate. And it's a question, and there's no indication anywhere in the Torah of how to observe this holiday, the significance of this holiday. So really, what is it all about? Why is it so significant? And the answer is because Tu B'Shvat is the Rosh Hashanah of trees. And it happens in the middle of the winter time, when it seems that all of the vegetation is covered with snow in some places and cold, and the trees are barren of their leaves. The fruit is just starting to sprout, and it doesn't seem like there's too much growth going on. In my backyard, we planted many years ago an arava tree, a willow tree, and every year in clockwork, it loses its leaves at the beginning of the winter. Right after Sukkot, it completely loses every single leaf on the tree. And the tree is completely barren. It's only branches sticking up from the ground. And then miraculously, in the springtime, all of a sudden it starts to sprout. And we see leaves, and it's just an incredible miracle that happens every single year. And it comes right exactly when we need them on Sukkot for the aravos, for the willow branches that we say the blessing on together with the other three species. It's like God is preparing us and saying, okay, my trees need a rest, and I'm going to give them the good rest that they need to be replenished by the soil. And then after that, when you need the leaves, when you need the branches with lots of leaves on them, don't worry, they will be there for you. You'll be ready for them. It's an incredible thing. The word human in English is the name for man, of course, for human beings, for people. It's one of the few Hebrew words that actually, the English words, that really is connected to a Hebrew word as well. The word in Hebrew for man is Adam, from Adama, from the ground, from the earth. So human has to do with Adama. How? Human has to do with, the source of it is the ground, the earth. For example, we eat delicious hummus, and hummus comes from the ground. The word hummus comes from the idea of from the ground, the same root as the word human. There are many other words in English connected with it. For example, humility. Humility is when a person gets down to the ground. They're at the level of the ground. They're very humble. Humiliation is another word that's very similar to human. Humiliation is when we are so embarrassed, we are humiliated, it's like we sink down to the ground. So whenever something has to do with the ground, with human, it has to do with that word. And similarly for Adama and Adam, man, of course, is created from the earth of the soil, And after we pass away, we are returned back to the soil, back to the earth. And it's the earth that replenishes all types of growth. It is the earth that gives us the nourishments that we need from the earth, from the ground. So the idea of Tu B'Shvat is that Tu B'Shvat celebrates the earth, not just the trees, but the earth. And what the earth gives to us through vegetation. Through vegetation. Without vegetation, what do we need the earth for? The whole idea is that the nutrients in the earth give the trees and the flowers what they need to grow. And that's the amazing thing about it. In Judaism, we have one day that we celebrate trees, not just trees, but all types of flora and fauna, all types of growth things, which we call tzomeach, things that grow from the ground. And in terms of that, the Torah in Dvarim says, Adam ki eitz hasada, man is like a tree of the field. And there are many qualities that we have that imitate trees, such as branches. We extend our branches, our reach outward, and influence those around us, both our family members and those outside of us, by having pupils and by teaching other people. By having fruit, we give the fruit of a tree is the fruit of our labors, as they say. What we accomplish in this world is the fruit that comes from the work we do and the effort that we expend in doing so many things while we're on this world. The leaves give light to us and they transform the atmosphere into carbon dioxide, which they need to grow. It's done through photosynthesis, again, in the leaves of the tree, connecting with the idea that we need also inspiration. We also need to grow. And how do we do that? By the sunlight of Torah and mitzvahs, and by godliness that comes into our lives, which is the leaves and the photosynthesis that comes into the world. Of course, trees have strong trunks, and we also need to have a firm foundation in our lives, something that will not break, and something that will keep us strong and healthy and well throughout our lives, which is the values that we are taught as children, the values that the Torah teaches us, which is really the strength of the trunk of the tree. Without that strong foundation, we will topple over and we'll fall down. And finally, trees need to have roots. The roots are the source of where everything happens, but it happens below the ground. And we Jews also have roots. We need to have roots of our families, of our tradition, of our heritage, where we come from, and recognize the fact that without those strong roots, we will not be able to survive either. The man, in many respects, is compared to a tree. Interestingly, in Jewish tradition, there is no mitzvah to uproot a tree, to break a tree, to cut a tree down, as there is, for example, in Christianity, where they cut down trees every year. Granted, those trees are grown for the purpose of being cut down, but nevertheless, Judaism, there is no mitzvah to cut down a tree. Quite the opposite. Jews are not permitted to cut down trees, especially fruit trees. You're not allowed to cut down a tree unless you're going to replant it afterwards, even if it's not a fruit tree. Trees need to be replanted. They need to grow. Many years ago, when we purchased our home, we did some work in the home, and by accident, the builders broke a lemon tree that was in our backyard, and it completely broke. It was flattened to the ground, and we felt very bad about it. It was a beautiful fruit tree, gave lovely lemons, and the builders accidentally destroyed the tree. So we felt so bad about it that eventually we replanted a lemon tree in our backyard. And that lemon tree now is starting to sprout beautiful lemons after many years. And I always say that lemon tree that we have now is a reincarnation of the original lemon tree that grew many years before. And who knows how long that tree was there before we purchased the house. So we have that tree to this day. And that tree, as a matter of fact, just this morning I picked a few beautiful lemons from that tree. That tree gives magnificent lemons. So the idea of replanting is something very important. But we do not cut down trees. we plant trees. In Israel, it's a very important thing for people to go out on Tu B'Shvat and they plant a tree. Trees are planted for special occasions. We know the Jewish National Funds has a tree planting program where you can purchase a tree in Israel for a loved one, which many of us have done already. I've done that many times. People have planted trees in my honor over the years. A number of years ago, I was in Israel when they had a terrible fire in the Jerusalem forest just outside of Yerushalayim, maybe 25 years ago. And the fires they believed they were caused by Arab terrorists who lit them. And we know even today from Gaza they send fire balloons over the border to Israel with the hope that they will burn down trees, because they know that for Jews trees are sacred. Trees are very holy and very special. There's a very beautiful, by the way, when this happened, when I was in Israel, there was like a time of mourning. Everyone was mourning the trees. Thousands and thousands of acres were destroyed. It was a horrible thing to see. I saw it myself. Horrible thing to see. Because Israel essentially is a desert. Trees do not, in many cases, certainly in the south, trees do not grow naturally there. It's barren. There's no rain virtually from Pesach till Sukkos. Virtually not a drop. And even in the wintertime, we're lucky to have very much rain. So the south of Israel is very, very barren, unlike the north of Israel, which is lush with vegetation. But the south of Israel, where Yerushalayim is, the Judean hills, is very rocky and very, very barren. So for Jews to have taken that land and planted hundreds of thousands of acres of trees is a tremendous blessing. And in many respects, that is the symbol of the Jewish people, taking a barren wilderness representing Jewish life and replanting it, making it grow again, make it beautiful again. Certainly today is Holocaust Memorial Day, where we commemorate the millions of people who died in the Holocaust. It's the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz concentration camp. And there are memorial services and prayers being said by Jews and others all over the world. Even in the German Parliament, they're having prayers and readings about the Holocaust. So it's a time that we remember the Holocaust and the destruction of life and Jewish life in the Holocaust that happened during the Holocaust some 70 years ago. So at the end of the Holocaust, it was like barren wilderness. Millions of Jews died, and it was horrible, and people thought, how in the world can we rebuild? How can we replant Jewish life as it existed before the Holocaust, both in Europe and all over the world? Because Jewish life in Europe was tremendous. There were cities and communities that had very large Jewish populations of Jewish people. There were synagogues, yeshivas, there were mikvahs, there were all kinds of things. There were synagogue, everything. You name it, they had it. It was an incredible life that they had. Yes, there was anti-Semitism. Yes, there was poverty, but Jewish life was unprecedented. And miraculously, the winter got over, and the summer came about, and the leaves would grow again, and the fruit started to grow again, and we saw that Jewish life was replanted as never before in history after this terrible winter that we had. So Jewish life, in many respects, is compared to trees and to vegetation and to growth and things like that as well. We, as I mentioned, we do not cut down trees in Judaism, but we do cut down branches from time to time, such as on the holiday of Sukkot, which is very much a harvest festival. And there we take a lulav, a palm branch from a date tree, and we take a willow branch and a myrtle branch together with a fruit of a beautiful esrog, a citron, and we say a blessing on the four species together, again with the hope and prayer that they will all grow back again. In fact, an esrog needs to be on a tree for at least 1 year before it is suitable to be used as an esrog for the holiday of Sukkot. But we don't cut down those trees. We keep them alive, and they continue until next year, and so on and so forth, even after that. So we believe very much in the idea of replanting and not cutting down. Even on Shabbos, we are not allowed to harm trees, to cut them down, even to climb up on a tree for fear that you might destroy it or break a branch or something like that. So there are many laws on Shabbos dealing with trees and the prohibitions of what we can do and what we can't do using trees and flowers and fruit and things like that. So what is the custom of Tu B'Shvat? What do we do on Tu B'Shvat? Well, as I said, there's nothing in the Torah that talks about the mitzvahs of Tu B'Shvat. There are no mitzvahs of Tu B'Shvat. So what do? We do two things essentially. One is we eat the fruit of Israel. It's customary to eat the fruits of Israel. What are the fruits of Israel? They are wheat and barley, which are the two grains. And then there are 5 fruits: pomegranates, grapes, dates, figs, and olives. These are the 5 fruits. And this is significant that the grains are mentioned first. Chita and Sa'ara are mentioned first, and then the fruits are mentioned after that. What's the significance of that? We know that Sephardic Jews make a Seder on Tu B'Shvat, according to the custom of the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, who lived in the 1500s in Tzfat. The Kabbalists, the mystics of Tzfat, put these things together, and they made a Seder similar to a Seder of Passover. They even drink 4 cups of wine. So it's different, of course. There's no maror, there's no matzah, of course, but there are different fruits that we eat, and we celebrate those fruits on Tu B'Shvat at this particular Seder. And we talk about them. Some fruits have pits, some don't. Some fruits have peels, some of them don't. Some we make a blessing on a new fruit, something that we haven't eaten the whole year. And each time we eat one of the fruits, we say something along the lines of the importance of that particular fruit. And in addition to that, we also plant trees on Tu B'Shvat. In Israel, especially, people have a custom that on Tu B'Shvat they go out to the fields and they plant a tree. There is an old custom that I heard of that people, when a baby is born, they plant a tree and it sprouts. And when the child gets married, they cut some of the branches from that tree that's been growing for 20, 30 years, and they use that as part of the chuppah to get married under, the canopy that they get married under when their wedding comes. So we see the continuation of life from birth to marriage, from birth to marriage. So we see that things continue from that. Also, it's interesting that many people have a custom, especially great tzaddikim, very holy people, that when they prepare a coffin, when someone passes away, they will take the table that person studied with during his lifetime or prayed at during his lifetime, and then make a coffin out of that table. In fact, I saw myself when the Lubavitch Rebbe passed away. They took the table in 770 in Chabad headquarters where he davened every day, twice a day. They took that table and very quickly they made it into a coffin where he rested, where he ended up being buried. And this is done in many communities. They will do that as well. In my case, it could be a bit of a problem because the coffin would be made out of plastic, but that's another story. We shall live long years before that happens. But that was a custom to do that. Again, the coffin was made out of wood, and simple wood, and a wood that disintegrates quickly, such as pine wood, which was a common thing. So the continuation of life in the ground, life begins in the ground, life ends in the ground. A seed, we find that a seed is a very significant thing. A seed grows first of all, we take a seed, say from an apple tree or an orange tree, and we plant it in the ground. And what happens after we do that? It disintegrates. It becomes putrid, and it looks very bad and wormy and things like that. And we say, oh my goodness, if you ever see a seed that's been in the ground for several months or even weeks, it becomes very mushy and very, very putrid. It doesn't look very healthy and very pleasant. And certainly no one would want to eat it or mix it into your foods in any which way. But then all of a sudden something very amazing happens to it. And all of a sudden it opens up, that seed, and a little sprout comes out of it, a tiny little sprout. And if you want to, you can take a seed from any fruit that you want, put it in a glass of water, and you will see gradually that's what happens to it. The seed will open up, and it will start to disintegrate. And then all of a sudden you'll see a sprout growing from that seed, a beautiful little sprout with a little leaf on top of it perhaps. And then it gets larger and larger and larger until eventually it breaks through the water or breaks through the earth. And that's the time that you plant it in the ground. And then it continues to grow more and more and more. And if you watch it over a long period of time, that will actually grow into a full-size tree. If anyone has ever been to Sequoia National Park, you see these huge, immense trees that are hundreds and hundreds of years old. And they all started with a tiny little seed that was growing in the ground. A tiny, tiny little seed. And those seeds are really the seeds of life, the seeds of growth that happens in each one of our lives. That it seems that life is finished, it's gone, it's over, but all of a sudden a new sprout sprouts. And there are a couple examples of this. For example, Tchias HaMesim, resurrection of the dead, happens exactly in this way. There is a little bone that's found in the back of the head where the tefillin strap, the tefillin knot rests in the back of our head. It's called the nape of the neck. It's the hollow part of the back of the head. And in there is a little bone, probably part of the spinal column. And in Hebrew we call it the luz bone, etzem luz, the luz bone. And that luz bone, we believe, never ever disintegrates. It never is destroyed. But from that luz bone, a person will be reborn, will be regrown after Tchias HaMesim, when resurrection of the dead takes place. And a full-fledged person, a fully grown person, will emerge from that luz bone. People ask, well, what happened to all the Jews who died in the concentration camps, where they were cremated and their bones were destroyed? Well, you'll find that, I am not an expert, but you'll find that in every cremation, as thorough as it is, there are still bone fragments, even small ones, that remain after cremation. And from those bone fragments, that is where the person will be born again, so to speak, reborn from those bone fragments as well. That's why it's very important not to be cremated, because it destroys much of the loose bone, even though it won't destroy all of it. But it's strongly recommended, according to Jewish law and tradition, not to be cremated because of the damage it could do to that seed, to that loose bone. So we continue with the idea of Tu B'Shvat. What is it all about? What's the significance of it? So we see that the 7 grains of Israel, the Sheva Minim, we call the seven species, are in order the wheat and barley first, and then the fruits last. And why is that? Because wheat and barley are staples of life. You can make bread out of them. You can make wheat bread, regular bread, or you can make barley bread. It can be made out of wheat or barley. So of the 7 species, the 2 grains, wheat and barley, are the most common. And barley and wheat are staples of life. Bread is considered a staple. The fruits, on the other hand, are not staples. The fruits are delightful. They're delicious. They bring enjoyment and pleasure to the world. Can you imagine a world without fruit? You picture a beautiful platter with grapes and figs and pomegranate seeds and all kinds of things on it. It looks beautiful and delicious. You just want to take a bite out of it. that it's a very delicious thing. When it comes to bread, it's a different type of thing. Even though bread can be very tasty, but bread is essentially a bland thing. It's bland. It doesn't have that much taste to it. People try to spice it up with olives, perhaps, or with other types of things. But bread, essentially, by nature, is a very bland, simple, basic food. A very basic thing. And the idea of it is that it's a staple. I was watching a program recently about the Russian Revolution. And before the Russian Revolution, the people were complaining there was no bread. In most times when there are severe poverty and revolutions come about, whether it's in France or Russia or these places, there is a lack of bread. There's no bread. What is the significance of bread? Bread is a staple of life. So I saw in this program, they were cutting up chunks of bread, wedges of bread, to pass out to the people to satisfy their hunger. Why didn't they send them oranges or apples or plums or things like that? Because bread was something that fills you up. In Jewish tradition, we are supposed to satiate ourselves with bread, and we can have a little meat, but you are not supposed to satiate yourself with meat, but rather with bread. If you don't have enough bread, at least a kazayas, at least the amount of a large olive or a small egg worth, called a kazayas, you cannot say the blessing after grace after meals. You need at least, for example, one slice of bread in order to do it. What happens if you have no bread? Your meal consists of fruit, vegetables, perhaps chicken or meat, or if you're having a dairy meal, perhaps cheese, things like that. You generally do not say Birchas HaMazon. There are opinions that say you do, but most people do not do Birchas HaMazon unless they are eating at least a small quantity of bread, because bread is the staple of life. Interestingly, today, it's quite the opposite. Today, they tell you, don't eat so much bread because it's got a lot of carbs in it, and eat more fruits and vegetables. But in Jewish tradition, we should eat more bread and be satiated with that rather than the fruits and the vegetables. In fact, we know if you eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, you can get this severe cramping in your stomach and things like that. You can't eat too much fruits and vegetables at one time. So, what is the significance? So, the Rebbe points out in the Sikha, he describes how bread, barley bread, wheat bread, represent the staples of Jewish life. And these represent the codes of Jewish law and the Talmud, what we call the revealed aspects of the Torah. Torah Sheba'al Peh, the revealed aspects, Nigla de Torah, which is the staple of life. Without the Shulchan Aruch, without the code of Jewish law, you really can't know how to act as a Jew. It's a basic thing that a Jew needs to learn halacha. You need to learn what to do as a Jew, how to put on tefillin, how to keep Shabbos, how to pray, how to keep kosher, etc. These are the staples of life, the basic staples. But that's not good enough. In olden days, that was good enough. In olden days, that was sufficient to keep us strong and Jewish and connected. But later days, say from the Middle Age, late Middle Ages on, it became not enough. Jews needed more. They needed delight. They needed pleasure in their Jewishness. Their Jewishness would not have been a burden, but it should be a pleasure, a delight. And that represents the idea of fruit, of the delicious fruits, the sweet fruits that are the last five of the species. We know that on Rosh Hashanah we eat pomegranates. We always look forward to eating delicious pomegranate, the seeds of the pomegranates, and the grapes, of course, and figs are all very, very sweet. They're all very, very good. So what is the idea of the sweetness of Torah? So the sweetness of Torah is actually, the Rebbe says, Pnimius Torah, the innermost aspects of the Torah, the life force of the Torah, the mystical spirituality part of the Torah. And that is the last five grades. And therefore, on Tu B'Shvat, the custom is really not to eat bread. According to most customs, it's not to eat bread, but rather it's to eat fruit. You take the various fruits and you make blessings over them and you say words over them. not the bread. Because in olden days we had the staples, but today the staples are not good enough. Today we need more. We need to inspire our young with spirituality and with holiness and with all of these types of things. That's what we really need today. If we simply teach our young the basics and the halachas of how to act as a Jew without giving them any of the delights and the pleasures of being a Jew, the beauty of being a Jew, we failed them. And they will leave us, unfortunately, as many of them are. Many Jewish kids today have been raised strictly and harshly and sent to schools where they're taught, but it wasn't enough. And afterwards, when they had the opportunity, they left and they pursued other religions, perhaps, or other ways of life, perhaps, and they've left their Jewish heritage behind simply because they were not given the happiness and the joy and the beauty and the spirituality that is so important. And for that reason, it is important for us to teach Panemius Torah, the innermost aspects of the Torah. I am learning right now with a young man who was just introduced recently to traditional Judaism, and he was studying with a rabbi, and he left and he moved to San Diego, and his rabbi back east asked him, "What are you learning? What are you studying?" And he said, "Well, I'm studying about the laws, and I'm studying Chumash, and I'm studying this, and I'm studying that, and I'm studying Tanya, the basic work of Chabad Hasidic philosophy." Oh, and the guy said, "Oh, what are you doing with that? What do you need Tanya for? You should learn more Chumash, you should learn Gemara, Talmud you should be learning. Why are you studying Tanya?" So I thought there aren't too many people who have that attitude anymore, unfortunately, but apparently this guy does, this rabbi does. And he is quite wrong, because Tanya is the delight, the joy, the fruit of Judaism. Tanya teaches the person all the beauty of Judaism. And not only Tanya, but there are many other books as well. Books of Musar, books of Kabbalah, and so many other books. Moshe Chaim Lutzato, the Ramchal, and so many other books like that. Chovos HaLevavos. So there's so many wonderful svarim that a person can learn that really don't tell you how to keep kosher or tell you how to keep Shabbos, but they tell you how to be a Jew, what it's all about. And it's interesting that in the Garden of Eden, what was the Garden of Eden? What was it? It was a garden. What was the nature of a garden? A garden is a place where things grow, especially trees. They grow in this beautiful garden, Gan Eden, Garden of Eden. Like a gan is a garden. So in the Garden of Eden there were two unique trees. There was the Eitz Chaim, the tree of life. There was the Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge, Tov V'Ra, of good and evil. These two trees were very unique trees. One of the trees represented life versus death, and it represented the idea of giving life and life force to the Jews, to the people. And the tree of knowledge was a tree that decided between good and evil, and it was the fruit which came to be our downfall in the Garden of Eden that Adam and Eve ate was from the Eitz Hadas, Tov V'Ra, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, where Chava, Eve, asked the serpent, "What will happen if I eat the fruit?" And the serpent said, "You will be like God, knowing good and evil." And indeed, after they ate it, they recognized the fact that they were naked, and they were now ashamed. And then after that, of course, they left the Garden of Eden. That was their downfall. Because the tree of knowledge is knowledge of good and evil. You can either choose good or you can choose evil for that tree. And trees are like that. No matter what tree it is, the wood from a tree can be used for all kinds of purposes. It can be used to make an Aron Kodesh, to make an ark which has the Torah inside of it, or it can be used in an evil way, in a bad way as well, to make a hammer or to make some type of sword or implement that can hurt, like a stick that can hit and hurt another person. So it depends on how it's used. It can be made into a table that people can sit around and study Torah or have a delicious meal together with their family. Or it can be a table in which bad people plot an evil scheme, such as hurting someone else or robbing from someone else. They sit down at the table and they put their plans out on the table. It all depends how it's used, what it's all about. So the trees really represent so many different things to us in many, many different ways. And let's see. Okay, we have a little more time. So let's get into a Sikha of the Rebbe about this, where the Rebbe talks about this. He says here the 15th day of the month is, of course, Tu B'Shvat, as we mentioned. And trees are part of the plant kingdom. Plants, unlike animals, die if uprooted from the earth. They exist and grow only when they continue to receive nourishment from their source. A tree needs nourishment. A Jew, too, lives and grows spiritually only when connected to his source, Torah and Judaism. It's not enough that a Jew once learned Torah, once performed mitzvos. He must constantly receive nourishment from his roots or risk spiritual death. You might have gone to yeshiva as a kid. You might have studied. Perhaps you were raised in a traditional home. How many people do we know of who came from Orthodox homes? Many very prominent people grew up in Orthodox homes, and they left Judaism after that. As I said before, it was perhaps because they weren't given the delicious pleasures of Judaism. But then along comes a rabbi or someone that they meet and says, you know what, why don't we study? Why don't we sit down once a week, twice a week and learn Torah? Let's sit down and learn. When's the last time you studied Torah? Oh, I can't even remember. Maybe my bar mitzvah. It was so long ago. And inevitably, when we start learning Torah, we start recognizing how important it is and how valuable it is and how special it is. There was a famous story told, a true story, of a rabbi, a Chabad rabbi, who was going around to different homes trying to meet people in a new community. And he met a couple. He saw there was a mezuzah on the door. So he met this couple and he introduced himself. And he offered to tell them, come to synagogue. We're starting a new Chabad house, a new synagogue here in your neighborhood, and we'd love to invite you. So the husband said, absolutely not. I don't believe in that stuff. I went to Hebrew school as a kid, and I left this long ago. I'm not interested. I don't believe in God. I'm not really interested at all. The wife, on the other hand, said, it might not be a bad idea. Why not? We get together and we'll learn a little bit. We're older people. They were retired already. Let's sit down and study a little bit with the rabbi. What will it kill us? So, grudgingly, they both sat down, especially grudgingly from the men's perspective, and once a week they would study Torah. And each time they studied, the woman became more interested, and the man kept saying, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in God, I'm not interested in this stuff. But as time went on, they started to do more mitzvahs. They started to keep Shabbos Friday night. They'd have a Shabbos meal. The women started lighting candles Friday night. They started to keep some of the holidays. They checked their mezuzahs and put kosher mezuzahs on their doors. Gradual. The whole time, the man insisted he does not believe in God. He doesn't believe in God. Until finally, one day, the rabbi was called to their home. And the woman met him at the door and said, my husband had a stroke, and it's very, very bad. And he wants to see you. He wants to see you. So the rabbi came in and saw him, and the man was very, very weak. And the man said, Rabbi, sit down. I want to tell you something. I don't believe I have much longer to live in this world. I really don't think I do. And I want you to do my funeral. I want you to do and even though I don't believe in God, I want you to do my funeral. And I want it to be the proper Jewish way, as you taught us. I want it to be the proper Jewish way. And it was an amazing thing. And indeed, soon after that, the man passed away, and the rabbi did the funeral. And it was a kosher, proper funeral in every respect. And at the funeral, the rabbi said, you know, I believe very much that so-and-so who passed away really did believe in God. He was a stubborn guy, but I think he really did believe in God very, very much. Because his soul, his essence believed in God. How did he come to that? How did he come to that realization? Is it possible that if he didn't learn with the rabbi, he probably would not have chosen a proper Jewish funeral? Maybe he would have chosen to be cremated. What caused him to turn around? And I believe very much it was because he started studying Torah with the rabbi. That by learning, by studying, Judaism is no longer an abstract thing that he didn't understand. It was no longer an immature Hebrew school lesson, but it was something very real, very sincere, and very deep and meaningful. And that is really what it was all about. And how did he learn that? By studying Torah. If we do not study, we lose it. Many years ago, as a rabbi of a community, very active and busy, I realized that I was not studying very much Gemara. I studied Talmud for years in the yeshiva. I was tested on it for many years, but after I left the yeshiva, got married, and came out to San Diego, I left the Gemara behind. I didn't study the Gemara so much. So I decided I was going to join up with the Daf Yomi program, the page a day program that hundreds of thousands of people throughout the world do, and I'm going to study it. I'm going to go sign on to that program. And I did. And for years, every day, to the present day, I study every day a page of the Talmud. I can't say that I understand it all. In fact, a lot of times I have no idea what it's talking about. No idea. Some of it's quite complicated. And I don't really have the time to go deeply into it and to study all of the commentaries and ask questions and this, that, the other. I just don't have that time. But I study it, as they say, begirsa, over text, just textual. Just move along, read it, study it, learn the Rashis, go over some of the Rashis for it. And over a period of time, I completed the entire Talmud. And I must say that the Talmud did a great deal for me in terms of connecting me and making my own faith and my own belief in Judaism much stronger, and my own ability to deal with my congregants and with Jewish life in general. Because without the foundation of knowledge, specifically of Jewish knowledge, how can you be a Jew? How can you understand what it's all about? And therefore, I think it's very interesting that if you were to look around the world and say which Jews are the most religious, the most observant, which ones would they be? Would they be the Reform, the Conservative, or the Orthodox? Well, of course, the Orthodox. The Orthodox are clearly the most observant, the most religious. They keep all the laws quite much more strictly, obviously. And who are the less observant? Conservative. They're traditional. They keep a lot of the many laws, perhaps, but not as much as the Orthodox. And who are the least observant? The Reform. Obviously, they don't do as much as the Conservative or the Orthodox. Most people who are Reformed don't have kosher homes. They don't keep Shabbos. Most of the men do not put on tefillin every day. They probably keep a lot of the traditions. They eat matzah on Passover, light a menorah on Hanukkah. They celebrate Purim, but certainly they're not Orthodox. When we refer to someone as they are Orthodox, means they are really religious. So, which of the Jews are the most knowledgeable in terms of Jewish tradition? Which ones? The Reform? No. The Conservative? More than the Reform. Obviously, the Orthodox are the most knowledgeable. How many Reform and Conservative have studied Talmud on a regular basis? Go over the weekly Torah portion every week or every day? Not too many. So the Orthodox are the most observant. I think most people would agree to that. They're the most observant, the most religious, and at the same time, they are the most knowledgeable in terms of Jewish life. Is that an accident? Is that a coincidence? No. Perhaps we could say that knowledge of Judaism made them more religious. If they study about it more, they will come to act upon it more. Obviously, if you learn more about something, you want to do it. You want to study the piano. Then the piano, it'll make you a much better pianist. The best pianists in the world, the greatest piano players in the world, are the ones who spent the most amount of time studying and practicing, obviously, the piano. That's how they're such great piano players. If a person is not such a great piano player, it's more likely they didn't study as much. They didn't practice it much. And of course, the same is true for those who are the least qualified piano players. They've studied the least, probably. If you want to devote yourself to something really good, spend a lot of time studying about it. And that is indeed the answer to how we are to maintain our Jewishness and continue that along with our children and our grandchildren as well. By studying, by learning, then they will come to do. Without the study, without the learning, they will not come to do as well. And that the tree teaches us that. The tree teaches us without the nourishment, the vital nourishment from the earth. And among the nourishment, the number one nourishment is, of course, water. Water is the most important thing that a tree or any type of vegetation needs. If you have a garden, go out there, you have to fertilize it from time to time, but you got to water it every couple of days, or nothing will grow at all. Water is the vitality of life. And our Torah tells us that water, the Torah is compared to water. Torah is compared to water. We go into a mikveh, we immerse ourselves in a mikveh of water. Water is the essential ingredient of life. And just as water keeps a tree alive, the Torah keeps Jews alive. Without Torah, there is no Judaism. And without Judaism, there's no Jewish life, and we cannot continue that along with our children and our grandchildren. So I want to wish you all a happy Tu B'Shvat, a joyous Tu B'Shvat. Go out and get some fruit and enjoy it together with your family. Shalom, shalom.